going to ask you to close your eyes and imagine this person with me. She radiates warmth and she has a fantastic big smile. She's Black, she's feminine, she's contemplative, maybe even spiritual, maybe even a little mystical. She's progressive in her political views and she's not afraid to communicate it. She's extremely intellectual, but she's also really accessible in how she shares complex ideas. She's stylish and absolutely having fun with it. She has boundaries and balance and puts self-care high on her to-do list. She's disciplined, and she expects those around her to be disciplined too. She conveys exceptionally high standards. She's conversational, she's funny, and she's really comfortable in who she is. And she has this well-earned inner authority. I wouldn't exactly call it swagger, but she's certainly powerful and maybe even a little badass. Who is she? What does she do for a living? Recently, there was a transition in the presidency at one of my alma maters, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I also serve on the alumni board there, so I had the opportunity to be close to the discernment process and welcoming of a very modern, new leader, Dr. Valerie Shears Ashby, who is just who I ask you to imagine. So who did the college community want to lead us? Who did we crave? Who did the university need now in this modern era? So UMBC did their work and they realized that we needed a leader who could carry us into the future in relevant, confident ways. Our new president, Dr. Valerie Shears Ashby, exemplifies modern executive presence. She's not who you might picture when you think of the archetypal college president. My mind still wafts back to Pale, Male, and Yale when I think college president. But Dr. Shears Ashby represents a new generation of executive leaders. Not just college presidents, but CEOs and leaders at every level, in every sector, and in every industry are changing. Who do we want to lead us? Why is it changing? What do we perceive as executive presence now? What can President Shears Ashby and other leaders like her teach us about authentic, fearless, truly modern leadership? Welcome to The Behaviorist with Work Wisdom, where we help you adopt high-performance mindsets, behaviors, communication, and culture. I'm your host, Kedron Crosby. Our intention for the Behaviorist podcast is to share accessible, concrete practices that you can weave into your whole life to begin a shift toward joy and meaningful achievement. Today, we're exploring the dramatic changes in what constitutes executive presence. We'll dig into why and how it is evolving and what it means for you in the Work Wisdom community. We're grateful to be talking with Dr. Ryan Berardi, SVP, Training and Development at CNS Companies, and Mike Mason, VP, People and Culture at Water Street Mission. Thank you both so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Mike, so nice to meet you for the first time.
Glad to be here as well. I love this topic. I love this conversation, and I'm excited to learn today.
Yeah.
Kedron, first of all, thank you for having me back on the podcast.
Of course.
This group really does such great work, and it's just an honor to be back, part of this conversation. I do want to share that what excites me about today's conversation is the doors that we might be a little closer to opening for professionals who have strong business acumen and a real thirst for serving others, helping them get to the C-suite table, so to speak. It's exciting for me. And you may remember last time I was here, I opened with empathizing with our audience and identifying the who cares factor, right? So I think for today, I challenge those who are not in executive roles to approach our thoughts with an open mind, noting that we don't profess to be right, just bringing perspectives we believe in. And to those in executive roles, perhaps a challenge to reflect on some of the thoughts and the research that we talk about today. And they can feel free to love it or hate it, but any reflection is worthwhile for their company, for the people they serve, and also for their clients.
I love that so much. And I want to encourage them to write in the chat, whether this is on LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever they're listening, to try and create a conversation about some of what you're suggesting. Listening, empathizing, and then maybe even saying what they love about it or what they hate about it.
Yeah, most definitely.
They can hate listen if they want to. That's totally fine. We'll take it all. Well, I'm just glad to be with both of you. I know that anytime I'm with both of you, I grow personally and professionally. So I'm so happy to have this time with you. So during our February Harvard Business Review Club meeting, we had this, I think it was a really exhilarating conversation about a new article that was in the January-February 2024 issue of HBR by Sylvia Ann Hewlett. She's an economist, and she wrote this incredible article that was mind-blowing for me. It was called The New Rules of Executive Presence. So, Mike, you're in the review club, and I thought it was an amazing conversation. Okay?
I agree.
Okay, great. So, in the article, Hewlett shares the results of a survey that she conducted first in 2012 and then again in 2022 that reveals very different results about what we now think constitutes executive presence. So in the club, some of us were really thrilled by some of the shifts that this decade of tumult had evolved us. Some of us were a little worried about some of the changes. And Hewlett found that there were significant changes in perception and appetites for executive presence as it related to three different areas. One is gravitas, one is strong communication skills, and then the right appearance. These are what she considers the three attributes of executive presence. So before we get into what she had to say about it, I just want to hear what you two think about executive presence. So now, Ryan, your background is different than Mike's. Your background is as an educator, but in different ways, in K-12, public school systems, but also in corporate settings. I'm curious, this phrase executive presence, what do you think people mean when they say executive presence? Do they use it in schools or corporate settings? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. The language may have been a little bit different, but the conversation of who really are these people and what are their intentions, that's been a conversation that's come up again and again in all settings. Executive presence in my setting, first when I was a school principal and now part of a C-suite in a corporate setting, it really comes down to what does the presence of said person in the organization do for productivity, for profit, and for the culture of the workplace. It's going to impact, it's either going to grow it or help kill it. There's no homeostasis. So what's it actually doing when we talk about said person in the organization? So I believe it's going to be healthy to ensure that we here around the table all have the same definition of what we mean when we talk about executive. We're talking about executive presence, but I thought it might just be healthy just for me to offer at least just for a second what I believe the word executive means when it comes to the workplace. But please feel free to disagree with any of my thoughts, as always. I think these are roles that have the greatest level of influence within an organization, either in full or in a subsection of the organizations when they're really large. The decisions of these folks will almost always have layered implications that will be unseen yet felt significantly by other individuals. Their professional and personal words will always reflect on the organization. Because of the influence that's wielded by these individuals in these roles, there will be a basic intertwining of DNA, so to speak, regarding their personal and business components of their lives. Fair or not, I believe that to be true. It's not necessarily done in an unhealthy way, but in a way that it's remarkable enough to be aware of, that anything that they say, do, whether they're on the clock, off the clock, it's all reflecting back on the organization when you are truly an executive. I found them also to be positions that without intentional focus on managing yourself through good emotional hygiene may be ultimately harmful to the executive and or their families if they're not aware of the managing and taking care of yourself in these particular roles. So to be clear, these are positions that are exciting. They bring great value, bring great economic prosperity, and can understandably be goals for many professionals. one simply needs to be aware of the tools at their disposal to be sure they're used for construction of outcomes versus careless wielding of influence that creates chaos and or disconnection within their organizations.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Executive. So, I think it was John Maxwell who said leadership is influence.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the influence that they have, the contagion that they have in all kinds of ways in the organization. So how do they manage it themselves? Because it's going to cause a ripple in so many different ways, for better or for worse. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Mike, your background is different than Ryan's.
Yeah.
And so you've been a pastor, you've been a nonprofit executive, to use that word again. Have you found that people in those settings use that phrase? Is that the phrase, or is it something else? Or how do they talk about this?
Yeah, great question. I just want to comment too, Ryan, on the definition you shared. Really helpful. The question I was asking as you were talking was how many executives were told that is what this actually is before they got into the role.
Yeah, well said.
That would be 1%.
Yeah. So I think it's like, really? That's expected of me? I'm like, yeah, actually people are looking for that from me. So back to your question though, Kedron, I think for me, I've noticed the tension in faith communities and nonprofit communities. And the tension is sometimes there's this drive in nonprofits and faith communities to not be so corporate, to strip down the language that's used in corporate America or business skills to say, that's not who we are. We're not like them. But also the same tension to drive to more organization and better business practices to say, like, we want to adopt these philosophies, but we don't want to call it executive presence. So I haven't really heard that language used a lot in churches at all. I've heard a lot of servant leadership. I've seen executive teams within churches. And in nonprofits, we talk about leadership presence more than anything. I think the real question really is about when a leader's in the room, what do people feel? What are they experiencing? How are they responding? And that conversation is just really, really critical. We talk a lot about at Water Street Mission, how are we getting outside of our meetings, our comforts, behind our desks, and going wherever people are at, like going to where they are and saying, okay, you know what? Can I just sit with you for a couple of minutes? Let me just slow down and just ask a couple questions, get to know who you are, versus being so comfortable where I am behind my desk. So.
I love it. And you're both bringing up something which is modern, which is feeling, and how do others feel, and how does our presence impact them. And so the empathy, the feeling, the contagion that we're talking about, I think that's showing up in Hewlett's research.
Yeah.
And I think that's the trend that I gotta say I'm excited about. I think it's positive. Now it means better self-management, doesn't it? But I think ultimately it's good for humankind. So in Hewlett's research, she points out several societal shifts that may be causing the redefining of executive presence. She mentions climate change, COVID, war, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, the LGBTQ plus movement, worsening political divides, the rise of Zoom and Instagram, and other online platforms. What I'm wondering about is, in your professional world, which of these or other factors altogether have had the most significant impact on the changes to these new rules of executive presence? Mike, is there something in that list that you feel like has really had a significant impact, or is there something else that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think, all that you share makes me want to just take a quick breath and go, wow, this is a good bit.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a collective of things happening each year. I notice there's a longing for everybody in the workplace for some level of slowing down of all these shifts, all these changes, all this level of, this is hard, And I'm realizing that what people want most from leaders is, are you aware of how these things are impacting the fullness, my entire life?
Well said.
Not just my work life. And so what I realize is that we want certain things to slow down or stop or get easier, but they're just not getting any easier. And so I think it's all of these things. And people are looking for leaders who understand that it's not just impacting me in the workplace, it's impacting me at home. And are you aware of how it's impacting me in all of these spaces? And so I think there's a longing for understanding around this collective suffering, if you will, that we've all experienced more so now we're more aware of it in the West. And so I just believe that people are really longing for this listening, this understanding approach from leaders today, and not just thinking that it's going to, we can make one decision to help stop all these challenges. No, we have to wrestle with them. But the real question is, are you aware that this is taking a toll on me? This is costing me something, not just in the workplace.
Thank you. Well said. Ryan, what do you think? When you look at that list that she brings up, is there something else that you think is having an impact on these new roles?
Yeah, I mean, to Mike's point, so this list collectively, I think one notable factor worth calling out that is, as a modern society, we have more access to information than we've ever had in the history of the world until tomorrow. Then we'll have a little bit more. And this will continue to be both a blessing and a challenge. The amount of information available, okay, so if you look at the growth of the amount of information that's at our fingertips and compare that to the growth rate of our ability and willingness as a society to think critically, have thoughtful debate on ideas versus tearing down individuals, they're not growing at the same rate. And I know this because in the school system, we tried our darndest to make sure that we could have our kids have healthy debate, that they had the ability to discern and think critically. But the rate, it was just impossible to keep up with. And this was actually the premise of my dissertation in 2015. I wrote on digital citizenship. And at no fault of anyone's, it just ballooned as far as the world becoming flat, having access to stuff. Some of that stuff being actual stuff, some being strong opinions, some being strong anger that's legitimate, others being, trolling. We can go on and on, right? There's just been a disparity between the growth of those two. So the presence of everything you've mentioned has resulted in some worst case and best case scenarios. In worst case scenarios, it's caused some executives to do everything they can to distance themselves from world events. They'll say things like, we just want to make blank product. We have no opinions on situation X. The problem is that the people who they employ may have lived experiences impacted by situation X. And they, as executives, like it or not, the reality is part of their responsibility is the well-being of their employees, and their employees may be impacted by situation X. In best case scenarios, it's caused some executives to be very transparent. This is what I love about some of the executives that I want to be like when I grow up someday. They're very transparent about what they don't know. They indicate that our community is experiencing varying impacts about situation X. It would be irresponsible for me to pretend that I know or remotely understand how any one person or group of people are impacted. But here's where we're going to start. However, we're going to listen to see what action makes sense for us. We're going to try to get it right, and we are certain we'll get it wrong along the way as well. But our promise is to keep on learning. And man, that takes a level of humility and openness for an executive to say, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to start trying to figure it out. I've seen the hurt from some of what you've mentioned in school settings and professional settings, and it's resulted in anger, clouding, and willingness to listen. And the only way to help a person who's being emotionally hijacked, a limbic system overload, is to help them feel heard. But this requires a skin that's thick to unfair attacks, yet still open to feeling and serving those same yelling people who appear to be out for blood. It's a tough job being an executive, but it is one of the most rewarding jobs when you recognize the privilege you have of serving people during times of real challenge in our world. And there's no shortage of that.
Yeah. These are excellent additions to her list of all the reasons why the role of the executive and what we need from our executives is changing. So, Mike, I'm hearing this move towards seeing our employees as whole people that aren't just commodities, but they have lives outside of work, and they're bringing their lives outside of work. The perpetual heightened change that comes from this onslaught of information, the world being flat, the Thomas Friedman ideas, also the generational changes. We've got digital natives that are coming into the workplace, this desire for authenticity, and all of it is culminating in some awareness that we need to be listeners in order for people to feel whole. They need to feel heard. And so that's really changing the role of leadership. The command and control is no longer valuable because in order for us to help our teams become the best version of themselves, they need to flourish, and so they need to be heard. So what we need from our leaders is very different than it was even in 2012. Let's talk a little bit about the striking changes and the specific traits that people consider most important when we're defining executive presence. So the author, she divides the traits into these 3 categories. So gravitas is the first category. So that's confidence and decisiveness and integrity, emotional intelligence, blue chip pedigree, vision, inclusiveness, and respect for others. And that's evolving. Some of it's evolving and some of it's staying the same. The second category is communication traits. So this is, superior speaking skills, command of a room or command of a Zoom room, forcefulness, the ability to read an audience, joking, bantering, use of body language, listening to learn orientation, ability to read an audience, and authenticity. Again, some of it's staying the same, some of it's really changing. And this third category is appearance traits. So polished look, physical attractiveness, this next job style of dress, tallness, fitness, new normal style of dress, youthfulness, curation of an online image, slimness, and the willingness to show up in person. And again, some of it's staying the same and some of it's changing. So I want to hear from both of you. Ryan, in your own executive presence, would you be willing to share which of these 3 categories has most played to your strengths when we're thinking about gravitas, communication, appearance traits? Which one has helped you go so far in your career? If you just had to choose one category and maybe even some elements within that category.
So I'll touch on speaking skills regarding what's felt natural and helped me grow. But note that this was developed through lots of bumps and bruises and mistakes and crucial conversations along the way. Communication, and this, if there's any takeaways from this, from any of the words that I say, maybe this will be one of them. Probably not the most important one from comparing what you two say, but let me say this. Communication that is impactful is simple and concise. So this falls under the tough lessons category for me. Though embarrassing to admit, my 20s and most of my 30s were years I spent proudly showcasing my vocabulary that would often result in people saying, kind of with like a little giggle, I'm not sure I fully understand everything you were just talking about. And at that time, I'm certain, and I say this with some chagrin here, I'm certain my thinking was, listen, if they can't understand the jargon of this particular topic, they need to brush up on their research. Here's the thing. It's embarrassing, but it's the truth. I know, right? Here's the thing. I wasn't speaking for my listener. I was simply speaking, probably with the mindset of, if you want some takeaways, it's your job to figure this out. When I think about the executives, and frankly, just the people who I really admire, they're the ones who find ways to explain things in a manner that others understand the first time and allow them to confidently enter the conversation. The executives who are delivering the speech, they know they're not delivering the final product. They see like a gasoline field of ideas all around them, and they just want to be the match, and also the wind. They want to be the wind every now and again to direct the flames, but they know that they're not the end all be all of knowledge. They realize that they don't have most of the answers. Yeah. What they do have is the strategy to light up really smart people all around them, and they say it so clearly. And I watch them like, man, I want to be you. It's so cool to see it happen.
You're the match. You're the gas.
Yeah.
We'll just keep asking you back. Oh, man. I love it. So the communication traits, you've learned the hard way, like all of us learn. But that's been jet fuel for you. It has been. Okay. Where would you be without it?
I had somebody in my life tell me, if you want to be that vice president level, you have got to say less. And the stuff that you say has to be important every time. Now, whether I agree with all that or not, I'm not sure, but the saying less part was absolutely right. I was sucking up all the air in the room because I love to talk. And so it's important to know like your strengths, and also know the areas that you love that maybe aren't always going to be strengths, and know how to bring the right ingredients to whatever plate you're trying to put together.
Oh, it's so good. And your point about being succinct, I love all this research that's coming out, you know, and as a coach to people who are executives, I'm trying to encourage them to get the right word and get the right phrasing and get the right mic drop kind of moment. And in emails too, you know, all the research about how the more power you have, the shorter your emails are.
Yeah.
So I love it.
And
Thank you.
you think at the end of the day, like with us as leaders, our job is to empower other people to then be exponentially more impactful than what we could be alone. And so when you can share something in simple language where someone says, I understand, because they understand, now they have this intrinsic passion to do something with it. Yeah. That's exactly what you want to do. The last thing we want is to be like, listen, you're only going to understand a sprinkling of what I'm about to say because you don't have all the information. That's going to leave them feeling dejected and like, I'm not even sure if I can do what you're just asking me to do. That's the exact opposite of what we need to do as executives.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Mike, how about you? So of these three categories, what do you think? Which one of these do you feel might be the hardest for leaders to move the needle on? Or maybe which one do you think is the easiest? Which one would you consider to be the low-hanging fruit for fostering executive presence? Any opinions on this?
Yeah, great question. I'm going to share my perspective.
Okay.
We can disagree, which is okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
But I think for me, I'm going to say the gravitas traits only because this is so deeply personal to the individual and their values and their beliefs. And these areas can be developed, but it's really up to the individual to decide to grow in these areas. And also it's going to cost the individual something to move forward in these areas. And so whether it's integrity or inclusiveness or decisiveness or even confidence, it has to be cultivated by the individual with some help, but it won't may not just happen naturally. And so I think for me, it may not be natural strengths for everyone. And even in the shift for having inclusiveness going to up to number 3 and integrity going down to number 6 is a big deal. To really ask the question, how do I create an inclusive culture here within this organization is a new challenge that leaders face. When it comes down to, I think, low-hanging fruit, I'm going to speak around authenticity. I think, and I'm going to say a couple of things. I believe that people are longing to work with leaders who can show up and be honest about what they know and what they don't know.
Agreed.
And even beginning with, here's what I think is the best decision, but I'm not really sure. Can I get some feedback on that? Involving your teammates on solving some of the problems you're facing. Also being honest about areas you're making mistakes in. So I would say even committing to once or twice a week, just confessing to your team, hey, I dropped the ball in this area and I want to own it. Allow people to hear that from you, to see that from you. And that way across the organization and across teams, it's okay to say, you know what, I didn't get it right either. So I just think moving forward in authenticity is one way, by being honest, admitting mistakes, being honest about what you do not know, rather than having to present this facade that everybody usually knows you don't have it all together. And that is also okay.
Yeah, it in some ways it all feels hard, doesn't it? So I'm not sure. Is there any low hanging fruit? What can we just sort of flip the switch and have that new behavior in place, or is it just a matter of failing forward and getting the reps? So the hardest might be that gravitas, because so much of that is an inside job, and we have to change from the DNA, and get to the place of integrity, inclusiveness, confidence, even, and maybe the one that's going to move the needle the fastest would be around how do we become authentic, humble, collaborative leaders, where we really embody intellectual humility and that extreme ownership. Yeah. I screwed up. How can you help me? Can you help me? I'd like to ask for your help here.
Yeah. I think too. I think about the fact that so many of us are aware that leaders just in the world we live in, we're noticing gaps in integrity with leaders around us, whether it's political leaders. And so that weighs on the people we lead, and they're aware. So people are really not longing for this shiny perfection any longer. They're longing for honesty. Where are you really at? How are we really doing? And so I think as leaders, we can actually be a beacon of hope in our organizations by being authentic and honest in a world where people are struggling to find that everywhere else.
And it's happening simultaneously with cancel culture. So I think there's fear among executives to admit when we make mistakes because they're afraid they're going to be canceled. So I think it takes courage more than ever to have this kind of humility and say, I screwed up, or I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of relationship building that needs to happen so that leaders can also feel psychological safety, and they can do that hard work of admitting when they've maybe made mistakes or when they don't know. Some of the changes in executive presence have been signs of increased inclusivity. So I personally felt optimistic when I read this article. Which of the shifts do you find to be encouraging and why? So Mike, did any of the shifts in her data feel encouraging to you?
Yes, most definitely. I'm going to lean in with inclusiveness.
Okay.
And I think for me, it's taken a while for me to really be just owning who I am and organizations, the value I bring. So I think for me as a Black man in the workplace who's also a leader, I realized that it isn't just my education that's valuable to the organization. It's my life experiences also. So I can share a quick story with you. My wife has navigated some pretty challenging stuff in her life. 3 times cancer survivor. She's been a widow before, single mom, now gotten married again. And so if she were to join a workplace team, she's great with administration, great with organization and scheduling and coordinating things. But imagine the value she brings to problem solving and even difficulty and challenges based on her life experiences. So I think inclusiveness is really about understanding people have value they bring, also based on their life experiences and life challenges that can help really boost a team forward that may not be solely rooted in a degree or education. And so I just think that highlighting the diversity within teams, making space for everybody at the table really allows, what are we missing here as far as even problem solving that somebody may not have on paper, but they may have accumulated or acquired through life experience.
Yeah. And the more I think we understand that the growth really comes from struggle, the more looking outside of our work lives for how is this person, how do they have superpowers? How do they have super strength? How do they have empathy or tenacity in a way that they couldn't get from a degree, and that it's not going to show up on the resume.
Right.
But when you hear about their life and their lived experience, you can see, I see why this person is so powerful. Yeah.
Recently, we interviewed someone who had graduated in 2021, and I was impressed that they stuck it out through the pandemic, through virtual school, jobs changing, careers changing, future dreams having to shift. And I said, tell me more about that experience and why you chose to still stay with this degree and still finish. And so even realizing with some of our younger teammates, they had to navigate a world that I didn't have to navigate through college, with my hopes being shifted, and realizing that they cultivated some level of resilience that we need to tap into as organizational leaders here in 2024. So.
I heard you talk about some really amazing things, and Kedren, you named a couple different attributes, and it made me think about some of the words that we used to put into categories historically. Words like vulnerability and gentleness, that perhaps some of our listeners may think vulnerability, gentleness category, if you had weak and strong, you might try to throw it into weak. But let's go to an extreme. Let's talk about a surgeon who has a surgical knife in his or her hand, and they have to decide the right amount of pressure to do their job with gentleness. That's tactful. That's strong. When you have a surgeon who has a very difficult case in front of them, and they know that there's a life on the line, and so they show vulnerability and they reach out to their colleagues and say, I'm just not quite sure. Can you help me with this? That's not weakness. That is doing the absolute strongest thing you can in your job for your end goal. Yeah. So as executives, are you willing to shed a history of labels that have been put into categories and say, no, actually, I'm not so sure I agree with this anymore.
Yeah.
Am I willing to say that it is okay to not know, to not always be forceful, and to say what does a situation call for, whether it's through lived experience or through built business acumen or through degrees, so on and so forth. It requires a whole shake, right? And then you have in the back of your head, are people going to judge me for asking questions? Are they going to judge me for trying to show gentleness? You have to find a way to push beyond that. Your people depend on you. It's too important.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know that a modern leader could not show. I mean, could they? And it's so fascinating as I look at some of the successful modern leaders. They have to show both.
Yeah.
They have to be incredibly courageous, incredibly firm, have incredibly high expectations, maybe even intolerance for incompetence, and be exceptional listeners and wildly empathetic. So it's a both and so it's a lot of art, isn't it?
Yeah. It's definitely a dance, I would say. But I think that it's a good shift, and I think it's a shift to being more human versus having to be a shell of just giftedness or a shell of decisiveness. Where can you just be more human and kind of dance and not always have like one way, and maybe next week it's a little bit different, but it is a dance. It's not just one way and we can just figure it out.
Yeah, I feel like there's a real shift happening when there are these 8 dimensions of culture, and that's a different podcast that we'll go into, Aaron Meyer's work. But one of the dimensions of culture is, how do we trust? And so at one end of the continuum is a task orientation. We trust people who complete their tasks when they say they're going to complete them reliably, on time, all of that. At the other end is a culture of relationships. And so if we care about each other and we understand each other, listen to each other, see each other as whole people, then we trust each other. And so in the knowledge of culture, whether it's societal or organizational, not one is good or one is bad, but I feel like what we're seeing is a shift towards relational-based trust,
agreed.
And away from task-related trust. And so what that requires of us as leaders is to become more relationally intelligent, and maybe more even forgiving of situational sort of when we drop the ball, and so but knowing when we do that and when we don't do that.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm wondering, as leaders, learning how to give feedback, set expectations, empower with clarity of roles and responsibilities, and be hard on those things, hard on the people and soft, hard on the problem and soft on the people, to use the getting to yes phrase. So it seems like we're moving in that direction. All right, well, wonderful. So thank you so much. Ryan, when you read about the rules of executive presence, was there anything in there that felt particularly optimistic to you?
Yeah, for sure. I'm encouraged by seeing listening to learn orientation make an appearance on the list.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that at this point in my life, I think I've turned the corner of realizing that A, I know far less than a lot of people about a lot of things, and B, that this is okay as long as I position myself and my influence to collaborate with the experts around me in a way that allows us to achieve goals and stay humble throughout the process. I think relationships are built on a really simple idea. And when it's true, it's so glaringly obvious. When someone sees another person and they say, man, this person is genuinely happy to see me and cares about or wants to learn about what I have to say, or in tough conversations, this person is clear about where they disagree with me, but they're truly listening about what I have to say and knows that they don't know it all. I think in any organization I've been a part of in top leadership roles, I've had to come to terms with the fact that I won't be able to have the same authentic, deep relationships with everyone like I do with my direct reports for a whole host of reasons. One, just sheer numbers. But that doesn't mean you can't make the moments you do have with employees deeply impactful by physically visiting when possible. And when you are there, whether it's Zoom or face-to-face, being fully present. I really genuinely believe the days of walking in an office or a warehouse with a look somewhere between distance and sterile, like they're on the way out. Employees continue to become vocal about wanting to know that their presence matters. They aren't asking for something unreasonable in many situations. They simply want to know that those leading the charge are aware that they have thoughts.
You're bringing up so many great ideas too, Ryan. And one that I'm hearing that isn't really mentioned in the article is being fully present. You know, in order to listen, in order to see people and hear them, we need to be fully present. So, of course, this is antithetical to what's happening right now, because we're all, wrapped up in thinking about what's about to happen or what did happen or what's on our phone or what's vibrating in our pocket. There's so many distractions. So she doesn't mention it specifically, but is it necessary to be fully present in order to be an exceptional leader now? And so then how do we do that? Now, obviously, there's all kinds of mindfulness practices, learning how to compartmentalize, how to manage stress, what to do, what not to do. But I don't know. What do you two think about that? Is really becoming fully present one of the most important charges of being a leader now?
I'll let you answer, Mike, but I'd argue it's leading to my final question. It's the most important trait for executives, I would say.
Okay. I didn't read your notes ahead of time.
No, it's okay. I didn't share them. I'm sorry about that. But
that's great. I'm glad I read your mind.
I would argue it is the most important. You did read my mind on that.
I'm glad we're here. It's also part of my last point as well. I think the reality is, once again, we have influence as leaders, but also we don't have control, right? And so I think when people feel that you're actually in that moment with them, they kind of sit back and they go, okay. I can navigate relationship with this individual, no matter what we're navigating in the workplace. I can do it with this person. We're all starving for it. We're all starving for a sense of, is this person really here with me? And so I think it can be practical, but it comes down to looking at our calendars, our schedules, honoring our limits to understand if I want to be present with my teammates, my calendar must look a little bit different, because how I leave certain conversations or leave certain meetings matters throughout the entire day. And so I think, to your point, it is the most important thing right now we can offer to people around us.
So executive presence requires us to be present. Maybe that could be the title of this podcast. Or that's our next one. How about it, guys? What are you doing next weekend? Okay, wonderful. So during that review club that we had, Janine James, our vice president, she, we had this great conversation, and it was like, gosh, this seems like a whole lot of things that we have to learn how to do to be strong executives. And then Janine was having this realization like, there are some evergreen traits. And so maybe we just put our attention on some of these that they were true in 2012, they were true in 2022, they're probably going to be true in 2032. Maybe this is where we put our attention. So there were three. So confidence, it was the top trait in gravitas in both 2012 and 2022. And then superior speaking skills was the top communication trait in both decades. And then the polished look, and that means different things to different people, but that was at the top appearance trait in both decades too. So all three of those traits are learnable, developable, and I think they're within our control. So we decided at Work Wisdom, let's just put our attention on those three areas. So what can we do as individuals, but also as an organization, so that we're helping our clients ramp up their level of confidence and their speaking skills and their polished appearance. I'm ready to go shopping, as always. So Ryan, I know that you are wise counsel to many, many people. So if you were advising an employee or a friend who's seeking to develop their executive presence, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you. It's very kind of you to say. So while they all matter, I don't think I could possibly overemphasize the importance of confidence, but not simply for one's internal purposes alone, but the intention of instilling it in others. So I gave you the first one-liner. Here's my last one-liner, I think. Making others feel seen and heard, or providing confidence, is a gift that executives can and should give to their people. Hear me out. Every single day. There should not be a single day where you are not doing this. If you're not doing this on a given day, you've missed an opportunity. So there's a parable, and you may have heard this before, about a journalist who speaks to two renowned scientists at a cocktail party. And she's asked about her experiences afterward. She notes that she spent a period of time with the first scientist and left the interaction thinking, man, this professional is easily the most important person in the room. Then she notes she spent the same period of time with the second scientist. And when asked about that interaction, she reflected that with almost every question that she asked, the scientist wanted to know her thoughts, her insights, and ideas about relevant topics. And the scientist was so intently focused on everything she had to say. She notes that when she finished speaking with the second scientist, she said, I somehow felt that I was the most important person in the room. So the skill of self-discipline to stay focused on the task or person present in the moment is a skill of executive presence that will support every future effort you make as a top leader. The discipline to detach from the rest of the world when you've got that one person in front of you and say, this is all that matters right now. And dang, that's hard. But man, that is, as you mentioned about somebody who can feel it when that person's all in. Fair or not, that impact that you have on others, the forgiveness you offer to others, the dignity you provide in uncomfortable situations, it is magnified when you are in an executive position. There are only a handful of statements that I feel comfortable saying always or never to, but this is one. It is never a good idea to hire an executive who does not have a clear desire to serve people, period. You need other skills, but that can't be missing.
I love that. Wow. Thank you so much. Yeah, I want to listen to that over and over. I'm glad it's recorded. Mike, how about you? I know you also provide wise counsel to many other people. What advice would you give if they're also interested in becoming extraordinary leaders?
Yeah, I think two things. I love around confidence. I think that people know when a leader is not confident. And I think for me, confidence comes from doing the things that nobody gets to see throughout the day. And so I would encourage a leader to pick one or two things that they're going to focus on each week to help them build confidence. It could be something simple as, for myself, is going to the gym more frequently in the morning. And nobody gets to see that at 4:30 in the morning, but it's about me, taking care of myself and consistency for myself. And so I think as leaders, what's the one or two things you're going to be able to commit to that no one gets to see, but everybody feels the impact of your consistency in keeping the personal contracts with yourself. The other part I would say is just around being able to be present. And so we live in a world where we have so many more communication mediums to talk to each other through text message, email, what have you. But I feel like we have less time to actually have really good, authentic connection with people. And so people are starving for connection. And so as a leader, even if it's just for 5 minutes, you can be connected to that person in the moment by just pausing your thoughts about the meeting in 2 hours, what didn't go right an hour ago, what should be happening tomorrow, and just saying, you know what, let me surrender all of that. This person is so valuable that's in front of me. That's critical. So I just think really practically is just saying, hey, you know what, tomorrow's going to be tomorrow. But right now, this person is going to could possibly bring value to my world that I'm not even aware of. So it isn't just about me saying something to them. They probably have a gift to offer to me. And if I'm too busy, I'm going to miss that myself.
Fantastic.
Yeah, well said.
So confidence, I want to linger on this just a little bit. So confidence, we're all talking about confidence, aren't we? And it's not something we shine on, is it? Ryan, you're talking about sharing confidence, instilling confidence in other by your presence, and that they then flourish and grow and bloom because you're sharing that. I love what you're saying about confidence too, that we build confidence when no one's looking. It's those habits that are our inputs that help us to feel strong and have that inner authority. So I want us just to think about this fact that, confidence, it sounds like confidence is something that we can grow ourselves, and then we can share it, and we can do it in a very authentic way. Is there anything else that either of you would add about how you build confidence or how you instill confidence in others? Is there anything else that you want to add on this?
Yeah, I think when I see a confident leader, I think about courage. Okay. And so I think about constantly putting myself in positions to learn a new thing, to try a new thing that I might not be an expert at yet. And then also maybe encourage some people to join me on that journey as they watch me try a new thing or do a new thing or learn a new skill. So I think about constantly not being comfortable, but cultivating courage for the individual, but also within a team. It can be really, really helpful to build confidence. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So confidence, it comes from discomfort. It comes from experimentation. It comes from not being great at things and trying it anyhow and maybe risking failure. Do it afraid. Okay, yeah. Do you have any thoughts about confidence?
Yeah, I think a real quick one. I think back to like the just out of college version of me, like the 22-year-old version of me was just thinking, what exactly am I actually bringing to the table? Like I haven't lived a lot of life yet. Like how do I go about showing people that at that time the question probably was, how do I show people that I'm worthwhile? I'd say back to my younger self, you are worthwhile. I'd say that to anyone listening to this, that your very presence is valuable. It's not about what you do or your product. It's that you are you. But here's what I'd say pragmatically, what you can do to build confidence and to build understanding. Don't be afraid to ask people why questions, to say, man, like when I watch what you do or when I watched you make that decision, there was so much I didn't understand, and I'm curious, like if you could boil it down to the top 2 reasons as to the why for that decision, would you mind sharing that with me? And to ask it with a spirit of humility. It's not like, hey, I'm putting your back against the wall. I believe that being comfortable in the not knowing, the comfortable in the why, again, I'll say it one more time. There's so much I don't know, and I have to be comfortable with that. If I felt like being, the senior vice president of my company meant that I had to have all the answers, I would be poorly qualified to do what I do. But when you're comfortable with just not knowing and you make the practice of asking why, I do think that over time that does build confidence. And some of it just comes with living life and realizing that, man, mistakes come every single day. The more mistakes I make, the more I realize that I shouldn't fear them because they are going to come. I should try to know better and do better. But when the mistakes come, to feel the burn for a second, reflect on what can I learn from this, and then realize I'm one mistake smarter. I
love that.
I've never heard that. Oh my goodness. Okay, so the confidence actually comes from living in the uncertainty, it sounds like, and the discomfort, and having some sort of inner authority that we're trusting ourselves and that we're sharing that trust in ourselves with others around us, and that emboldens them and helps them have more confidence. Well, I'm so grateful to both of you for being part of this movement of helping others in the workplace to enhance their individual and collective team performance. Thank you, listeners, for downloading The Behaviorist, and we hope you'll subscribe. Please contact us through our website, workwisdomllc.com, where you can enjoy Work Wisdom Press and productions. You can ask questions, make suggestions of topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes. So, as is our custom, we'll leave you with a quote. This one's from Richard Rohr, and it sums up for me how we can go about evolving into more potent, meaningful executive presence. It's also the quote that's painted on my office wall and it inspires me daily. We do not think our way into new ways of living, but instead we live our ways into new ways of thinking.